Hi everyone! So it's been such a long time since I sat down to do a video in front of like my proper camera that I honestly don't even remember what that was. I think it was one of the very early introductory videos to me and my life here in Edinburgh, which is a crying shame. Obviously, as I keep repeating, I've been much busier here than I was expecting to be, but I really have been missing making videos. I've been really missing interacting with you guys, and I haven't replied to any of the YouTube comments and any of the videos that I've made since I got here to Edinburgh, but I keep just saying to myself, well, I'll just keep pushing on and making videos when I can, and at some point hopefully I'll get a chance to go back and actually respond to all of your comments, your lovely comments. I have kind of glanced over most of them, and been really moved by the lovely messages that a lot of you have been sending to me. And if you've sent me an email, if I do actually upload this video before I've had a chance to reply to some emails and messages on Facebook, if you've sent me an email or a message on Facebook just regarding my research or anything like that, I am trying to get back to you guys. I have so many emails in my mind that I'm meaning to send to you people, and I'm really sorry that it hasn't been happening. So without further ado, I'm going to kind of actually make some attempt at making a video on an actual topic this time. I did make a video around Samhain. You'll have noticed that nothing went up at Samhain. I did make a video on the evening that I celebrated Samhain. I didn't celebrate it just like ritually until the 5th, but it turned into such a long ramble. I spoke for about an hour, that I'm going to have to go back and seriously edit it down in order to make it kind of manageable for you guys and interesting for you guys, and that even finding the time to do that is just hasn't happened ever since. I just had that one evening where I was able to take the evening off and do my ritual, and kind of making that video was almost a sort of preparation for that ritual, is almost and actually, as one of you mentioned in a comment, I was kind of saying that I haven't been journaling since I got to Edinburgh, and even though I was doing some of the self-love September, self-love October stuff, I still wasn't journaling as much as I would have liked to. But I realised that for me, making videos has actually become a kind of a stand-in. It's become a form of diary writing for me, journal writing. And I think that's why the video that evening got so long and rambly, because it was not just for the consumption of you guys, it was also just sort of an alternative to me writing in my book of mirrors, essentially, and some of it at some point I might edit into something that might be of interest, but that's just not going to happen for a little while, so we'll see what that might make its way onto the channel at some point. But for the first time today, I want to actually sit down and have a bit of a chat about something that I've been reading for my course. So just because this is what I've been thinking about today, this is the class that I was at today, I'm going to talk today about the idea of religion as anthropomorphism. Because this is something that I actually think a lot of the major themes that have come up in my modules on theory of religion, theory and method, and theories of religion, a lot of the themes are actually things that people within the pagan community do actually talk about quite a lot. And I'm not sure if this is because pagans and people who have kind of a self-made spiritual path are kind of more well-read. That's kind of a trope, it's kind of an idea that gets thrown around a lot in the community. I'm not sure that that's actually true. It might just be the people who are engaging in the online community who are maybe a little bit, perhaps a bit more broadly read than your average person on religion. But maybe it is because paganism's all of this kind of spiritual, self-made spiritual, alternative spirituality stuff that we're all into in this community. And maybe it is because this is a new phenomenon, and I think we tend to be quite a lot more self-reflexive when we are engaging with this kind of spirituality, because it's not something that we land into, it's not something that we're brought up in, generally speaking. It's something that we find ourselves and that we place ourselves into. So there is a certain level of self-consciousness, I think, and a certain level where we feel like we need to defend our choices and just defend and kind of justify our choosing to have a particular spiritual path or a particular spiritual leaning or practice. And because people will ask, we get asked that a lot more, like why are you a pagan and what does that mean, and that kind of thing. Or even if we don't actually get asked the question, I think we can feel a bit defensive about it, and we feel as though people are going to ask that kind of thing. And because they are questions that we've probably asked ourselves, if we have at some point decided that we no longer want to be Christian, we no longer want to be an atheist, others, and we now want to consider ourselves pagan, we now want to have a spiritual practice, we want to celebrate the wheel of the year or whatever it is. At some point we will have asked ourselves questions, we will have kind of thought about something on some level. There will have been some sort of reason or motivation for us to make that change in our lives. And anthropomorphism and the question of, I think it comes up most often in discussions of polytheism. But within the pagan community, questions about anthropomorphization, and there certainly is a very wide awareness of the issue of whether the gods are sort of just anthropomorphizations of parts of the human psyche, of nature, or what have you. I think this is maybe an issue that doesn't come up as much within more kind of homogenous religions, like Christian religions and so forth, where there is a certain dogma, there's a certain set belief, and there doesn't tend to be as much dialogue about the nature of God. Certainly not between your average Christians. You don't have that kind of constant questioning of well, what is it you really believe about your God, and that kind of back and forth. Like I say, because everyone generally has the same belief within that community, and it's just not questioned so much. It's kind of a given. Whereas within paganism, one of the first things that you kind of have to ask yourself really is, what do I believe about the gods? Are the gods going to be a part of my practice? If not, then what makes my practice pagan? Do I believe that they are separate entities that have agency? Do I believe that they are archetypes? Are they just parts of my own psyche? Are they just symbols for me of things in nature? Or what exactly is going on with the gods? If you're a hard polytheist and you believe that they are beings who have agency, then you don't see them as anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism basically means the ascribing of human-like qualities to things that are not human-like. So as Guthrie points out, anthropomorphism by definition is a kind of mistake. It is this sort of ascribing. A mistake is a very loaded term, and I'll get to that in a minute. But it is this sort of ascribing of human-like characteristics to something that is not human-like. Now, obviously, if you say this to a hard polytheist, they might also say, well, we might understand the gods to seem, we understand them in human terms, but they're not really. Obviously, they're beyond human. But they're still seeing the gods as entities that have agency and intelligence in a way that is perhaps a lot more human-like than say people who are just describing kind of using the gods to symbolize things in nature, or aspects of nature, aspects of cosmos, but they do not think actually in reality hold those characteristics, if you see what I mean, like that we don't, that a person who maybe worships Odin as a personification of storm energy, they don't necessarily believe that storm energy has agency, that it has an intelligence or a consciousness that can interact with ours. It's simply a means of feeling connected to storm energy and of worshipping storm energy, of being reverential towards storm energy. And there is that consciousness there then that this is something that we're doing. So initially I found Guthrie's idea that religion is anthropomorphism, I found it to be hugely problematic. Because even just the simple statement that all religions have gods or a god, and if they don't, they're not religion. Right from the offset, you're kind of going, Buddhism? And he does address that to some degree. But I just found that uncomfortable to my mind, because I'm coming at this theory from a place of feeling quite broad in scope about what I will incorporate into religion, like what I will consider as being religion or being religious. I tend towards just seeing religion as something, as a word we use to describe some cultural phenomena, and I'm not really a big fan of getting too narrow about what we feel we can or cannot ascribe the word religion to. But then that isn't actually a particularly helpful way of approaching the study of religion, of course, because then it's like, well, what are you looking at? But then the more I started to think about it, the more I was able to actually start getting on board with this theory. And I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty of what I critiqued about it and what I agreed with and any of that kind of stuff, because, you know, a lot of you are not going to be so interested in getting into some complicated, detailed, theoretical debate from that kind of perspective. But it did kind of get me thinking about the fact that even atheistic or humanistic or naturalistic pagans, and I'm kind of very roughly speaking including myself in that category, the reality is that we do actually interact with deity. Most of us do anthropomorphize. And whereas Guthrie, I think, would not consider what we do religion because it's done consciously, well, I would definitely argue that it is religion, and just because it's done consciously, just because we don't actually believe that those entities have agency, just because we feel like we're doing this deliberately, that we're deliberately ascribing these human-like qualities to energies or patterns in the universe or whatever it is, I don't think that actually differentiates us as much as Guthrie seems to think from people who believe in that agency, who see things in a different way. I really don't think it looks that different, and this is where kind of a material approach to religion comes in. This is where it can actually get a little bit complicated to be looking too hard at beliefs as a way of differentiating what's going on within, you know, between religious people or comparing religious people. Looking solely at beliefs can get you kind of tangled up in knots. And if you look at, and that's one of the interesting things about paganism, I think, if you look at beliefs, we're so diverse as to make the label basically meaningless. But if you look at our practices, I think you can probably see more similarity. And that's where it gets kind of interesting, is that if you take a subsection of various different types of pagans who do interact with deities, no matter what kind of deity, whether it's just goddess, whether it's goddess and god, whether it is various different deities from various different pantheons, if you take a subsection of that and just have a look at the practices that we have of worship, of reverence towards those deities, and you look at how we speak, how we interact, what actions we perform, what kind of altars we have, what kind of words we speak, they would look very, very similar. And I'm not sure that you can start to say that there's any sort of really strict distinction between those religions, purely because we're ascribing different meaning or different interpretations as to what is actually going on. Because, okay, some of us have more kind of religious experiences than others. Some of us have more vivid experiences of interactions with deities, right? I mean, some of us have experiences where we literally hear words, or where we have very intense visions. But I think, generally speaking, for most religious people and for most pagans, it's quite a subtle affair, right? You know, you might do a sort of active imagination type thing, go into a bit of a trance, have a bit of a daydream, and you might, you know, kind of talk to a deity in that way, kind of through using your imagination, or you might kind of see a bird at a certain time, or see something that reminds you of something else, see something in nature, and it is all quite subtle. And I just find it very hard to see any really strict differences between what is actually going on for these people, because it strikes me that basically the same thing is happening to us. And on some level, for us, you know, like I say, naturalistic pagans, humanistic pagans, and so on, in a way there's a sort of situational kind of belief going on, where it's like a suspension of disbelief, I think, where we kind of engage with that process, we immerse ourselves totally in that process, and for that time, when we're communing with that deity, when we're making that offering, when we're saying that prayer, we are in a place of belief, for no matter how short or long that space of belief is. And I think that is probably true of, and now correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's probably true of most pagans who do interact with deity. Like I say, regardless of what our kind of cold beliefs are, you know, if we're actually talking about it from a logical perspective and we're outlining how we actually understand cosmos and what we actually believe in, we might not say that we believe that these deities can actually hear us, or that they are separate conscious beings who can interact with us, or if we do, we might think that they're just within our own psyches. But when it comes down to that actual moment of interaction, I really really struggle to see any really quantifiable difference whatsoever. And all it really comes down to is interpretation, and not even interpretation in the moment often, but interpretation after the fact, after the event. So yeah, it kind of, that really grabbed me, and that really stuck with me, that even though I got a little bit uncomfortable at the idea of religion being anthropomorphism, it's a terrible word. It's one of those words I think I say it differently every time, and I add an ification, an isation at the end, where it's not necessary. But yeah, as much as that kind of got me a little bit riled up, and like it made me feel a bit like, well, no, I don't think that is what my spiritual practice is about, because my spiritual practice is a lot more about communion with nature and communion with cosmos, and meditation and connection, and you know, I don't feel like I'm like inadvertently anthropomorphizing things about nature and things about the world. And I thought, well, okay, first of all, I'm doing some very conscious, deliberate anthropomorphization. And that's, you know, like I say, that kind of goes across the board for pagans, no matter what our beliefs about the gods. But also it kind of got me thinking about unconscious anthropomorphization, and what kind of role that plays in spirituality, religious belief, and even for people who don't really have a dedicated spiritual practice, but who feel like they are vaguely spiritual. And I think a lot of those kinds of people, and when we don't have our polytheist hats on, you know, like when we're just out in nature, when we're just meditating, when we're just engaging in our spiritual practice in a way that doesn't feel like we're actually communing with gods, or deliberately engaging with personified deity. Yeah, it kind of got me thinking about that too, because Guthrie's whole thesis and his whole theory, and there are lots of other old theorists as well long before him, like Hume and Feuerbach, who had similar ideas about religion and anthropomorphization. It's not a wholly new idea or anything. But one of the things, basically his thesis is that, you know, we anthropomorphize not just in religion. It's not just a religious phenomenon, it's something that we do all the time, as a sort of survival mechanism. And because this is just how our minds work. We are creatures who are constantly scanning our environment for signs of other humans, for signs of other kind of agency of other beings, and for symbolic interaction. And that is just something innate to us as humans, and something that we can't avoid. Now, for him, religion is systematized anthropomorphization. So, you know, there has to be some sort of organization to it. So in that way, you could say that, you know, any sort of worship of deity, so your polytheistic practice within paganism would be your religion in his eyes. But he also was touching on the fact that things like religious feeling, religious experiences, those moments of just when you're out, say, in nature, or whatever it is you're doing, and you just have that moment of where you switch into that religious space and you have that experience of awe or connection or wonder or reverence. You know, those moments when they just hit you. And you can't quite describe it, you can't quite put a finger on it, but it just feels sacred. Now, I think that he would argue that those kind of moments in and of themselves are not religious. They're not religion if they're not in the context of something organized. But I'm not sure that I would agree with that. But I think, but his understanding of that is that actually what's going on in those moments is an unconscious anthropomorphization. That something has struck you in your environment, and your unconscious has attributed some sort of greater agency to that. So your unconscious mind has seen something, has just clicked into some sort of pattern, has just kind of switched into something, and has gone, there's something bigger at work here. There's something something is in control. There's something behind the scenes here. There is some sort of intelligent design, intelligent work, intelligence or agency behind this. And again, you know, this is the kind of thing that makes me kind of bridle. It makes me kind of go, no, I don't. When I have those religious experiences, actually, you know, when I have those kind of moments of pure God, as I like to think of them sometimes, pure goddess. I mean, obviously when I start putting names, words like that, God or goddess onto it, that's anthropomorphization right there. But often for me in the moment, I don't feel like I'm really I'm not putting a face on it. It doesn't feel like a moment where I'm connecting with some sort of human-like presence or human-like figure. But when I started to think about it, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, maybe that is actually what it is. And it's just that we're not always interpreting the experience in that way. Do you know what I mean? Like, just because we're not kind of consciously saying, oh, I'm having this amazing experience of awe and wonder because it looks like, to me it seems in this moment that nature is just so wondrous and has this amazing kind of pattern to it and repetition, and it just this cycle, and I feel like I'm just part of this cycle, and oh, there must be some greater kind of human-like being who has created all of this. Even if we're not consciously stepping into that mindset, it kind of makes a little bit of sense to me that is the kind of way we're moving towards when we have those moments. So I just thought that was something interesting to think about, and it made me wonder, like, well, in that case, then can atheists have religious experiences even if they're not consciously ascribing a god or some sort of supernatural interpretation to that experience? Is that sort of a religious experience, if that's what religious experience is? Yeah, anyway, obviously I'm simplifying here a bit, but that just struck me today, and an awful lot of the time, and this is something that I have actually talked about before, because sometimes I get comments on YouTube videos saying, well, I don't like to use any pronouns for divinity, or I don't like to think of divinity as being, you know, male or female or human-like, or I don't like to put images on divinity, I just see divinity as the all, or I like to just address cosmos, and I kind of go, well, that's all very well, but personally, when I'm in a religious setting, if I don't use some sort of personal pronoun, if I don't anthropomorphize, it is harder for me to feel a sense of connection. And I definitely like to maintain a level of kind of mystery and awe, and I don't like to get too human-like with my personification, because to me, the most sacred thing is the mysterious, is the other. You know, it's that kind of the numinous, that which you cannot understand. That to me is the most sacred. But at the same time, even if you are addressing the all or cosmos, well, you are actually personifying it. You know, you're entering into a sort of symbolic interaction of some kind, and even if you're not expecting it to speak back, you're still behaving as though it might, or behaving as though it can hear you. So yeah, I think that's been an interesting one for me. It's really gotten me thinking about my own spiritual practice and what it is I'm actually up to when that happens, and is that actually the step that you take from going from just having a vague kind of spiritual kind of feeling about things, like, oh, I might believe in something, and maybe there's something greater than us, and you feel kind of connected to nature, to actually feeling like you have a dedicated spiritual practice or a religious practice. And maybe that step really does require anthropomorphization, that it requires you to actually instigate a relationship, some sort of reciprocal, or if not reciprocal, then just some sort of symbolic interaction where you are at least putting something out there, even if you're not expecting to receive anything in return. So that has been interesting for me, and I hope that's interesting for you guys too, and I hope that makes some sense, because I'm kind of running on empty right now as usual. I'm kind of exhausted, and I have a million and one things that I could be doing, but I just felt like turning on the camera and talking about that, because it was mulling in the back of my head, and I thought, well, if I don't sit down and turn the camera on now and talk about this, these ideas will never come up to the surface. So I hope that was interesting. Definitely share your thoughts or questions or musings or anything in the comments below, and I promise at some point I will actually go back to all my videos and reply, or at least read all the comments. Even if it is Christmas, then it will happen, because I'm going to take some time off at Christmas and I will catch up. And yeah, and I'm sorry as well for being so quiet on Facebook and Instagram and everything. It's been mad, guys. You've no idea. If you've ever done a Taught Masters, maybe you will have an idea, and then you'll understand my pain. But it's a good sort of pain. It's stimulating and exciting, and whenever I find myself feeling stressed and unhappy about my lifestyle, I kind of shake myself and say to myself, well, you know, don't think, Anya, don't think, oh, I have to do this reading now. Just say to yourself, I get to spend this morning reading about a theory of religion. I mean, living the dream.